In a federal trial watched by over 80 million people, Jasmine Crockett sued Tucker Carlson and Fox News for defamation after they aired a manipulated video accusing her of inciting hatred and silencing the press. For days, she remained silent, but just minutes into the trial, she unleashed undeniable evidence that made the Fox News empire tremble and collapse before millions of viewers. They were forced to face a devastating court verdict, broadcast to the same millions they once deceived. What exactly did Jasmine reveal that cost her everything but brought the truth crashing down inside their empire? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Under the glaring studio lights of Fox News, the broadcast didn't begin with news. It began with an attack. Tucker Carlson sat behind his desk, hands clasped tightly, eyes locked onto the camera like a prosecutor ready to make his case. His voice was calm, but every word carried an edge. "Jasmine Crockett," he said slowly, almost with amusement. "Is she the rising star of Congress, or just another radical activist using race as a weapon?" The screen behind him lit up with bold letters. "Exclusive. Crockett under fire." The music dropped low, tense as he continued. "Tonight, we reveal the story the mainstream media won't touch. Foreign money, threats against the free press, and a woman willing to burn down everything to climb higher." He claimed, without citing any verified evidence, that Crockett had accepted donations from foreign-aligned PACs operating under progressive banners. Then he accused her of abusing congressional power to intimidate conservative journalists, suggesting she used backroom influence to cancel stories critical of her policies. Finally, he leaned in and said, "And if you think I'm exaggerating, just watch what she said with your own eyes." The screen cut to a video clip, grainy, zoomed in, heavily edited. It showed Jasmine Crockett on the House floor during a heated debate, but the audio had been manipulated. Her words were clipped mid-sentence, transitions removed, making it appear as if she had said, "We must prosecute those who spread dangerous conservative lies in the media." In reality, her full statement was about regulating misinformation online, regardless of ideology. But that context had been sliced away. The words, "wants to jail journalists," appeared in all caps at the bottom of the screen. To the average viewer, unfamiliar with the original speech, it looked damning. Carlson didn't clarify the edits. He didn't offer the full quote. Instead, he let the clip run, nodded solemnly, and said, "That's who Jasmine Crockett really is." In the minutes that followed, outrage spread across screens, radios, and newsrooms nationwide. The video clip played again and again, on morning shows, talk radio, and panel discussions. Hosts and guests alike echoed Carlson's framing, that Crockett was dangerous, that she had crossed a line, that she didn't believe in the First Amendment. Angry calls and messages poured into her congressional office. Online forums debated whether she should be censured or removed from committee leadership. Several publications ran headlines like, "Crockett calls for prosecution of conservative media." But Jasmine had never said those words. Not in that way, not in that tone, not with that meaning. She was being rewritten, live in front of the nation. And no one, it seemed, was asking whether any of it was true. But as the doctored clip echoed across television screens and radio waves, Jasmine Crockett did not rush to clear her name. She didn't storm into a press room. She didn't post a fiery thread on social media. She didn't grant a single interview. To the outside world, it looked like silence. But inside her office, there was movement, measured, deliberate, disciplined. She spent hours reviewing the original footage, cross-referencing the segment with legal counsel, collecting timestamps, emails, and transcripts. She didn't just want to speak, she wanted to be right. Because she knew too well what happened to women like her who spoke too fast, too loud, or too soon. The system was never built to hear her side. It was built to magnify her missteps. And now it was clear. This wasn't just a smear. It was a setup, one calibrated to bait her into rage and paint her reaction as proof of everything they accused her of. Tucker Carlson, undeterred by her silence, used it as ammunition. On the very next night, his show opened with even more bite. "Where is Jasmine Crockett?" he asked with theatrical pause. Funny how someone who fights so hard for transparency suddenly vanishes when she's the one under the microscope. Behind him, the screen displayed a black and white photo of Jasmine mid-sentence, frozen in a harsh expression, with the caption, "Avoiding accountability?" He leaned forward and spoke directly to the camera, as if addressing her. "Ms. Crockett, if you have nothing to hide, why aren't you here to set the record straight?" It wasn't a question. It was a verdict wrapped in feigned curiosity. Conservative pundits picked up the line within hours. Editorials claimed her silence was deafening. Online forums turned the narrative into dogma. If she's clean, she'd speak. But Jasmine knew better. She'd seen what happened to truth when it was tossed into a room already filled with torches. If she was going to respond, it wouldn't be with words. They'd expect that. She needed something stronger, something that couldn't be twisted, something they didn't see coming. While millions of viewers were led to believe Jasmine Crockett had gone silent out of guilt or fear, the truth was far more deliberate and far more dangerous for those who had attacked her. Deep inside a dimly lit office in Washington, D.C., long after the corridors of Congress had emptied, Jasmine sat across from two of the most precise legal minds in the country. Dana Patel, a civil rights attorney known for exposing systemic abuses in powerful media empires, was already stacking files, each labeled, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. Beside her was Elliot Granger, a soft-spoken but razor-sharp former federal investigator whose specialty was digital forensics and media manipulation. He had once uncovered voice-forging software in an international misinformation probe. Now he was watching a doctored video of Jasmine Crockett on loop, frame by frame, waveform by waveform, searching not just for edits, but for intent. The office air was thick with focus. On one screen, the Fox News segment played in silence. On another, the original CSPAN footage of Jasmine's full speech ran uncut. The contrast was jarring. Where the Fox version showed a clipped, angry woman calling to prosecute conservative lies, the original revealed a measured, legally grounded argument about the spread of any false information, left or right, and how it endangered democracy. Elliot slowed the Fox version down, pinpointed a seam in the audio. He highlighted a dip in vocal tone. Unnatural, too smooth. "There," he said. "That word was replaced. It's not her voice. They used AI overlay." Jasmine leaned in, eyes narrowing. The voice sounded like her, but not quite. Just enough to fool the public. Just enough to destroy credibility without firing a single bullet. And that was the brilliance and the horror of what they had done. Donna stepped in next, flipping open a legal dossier marked with Carlson's name. Inside were screen captures of the segment, metadata records from the Fox News upload, and crosslinks to online forums where the doctored clip had been seeded hours before the show even aired. "This wasn't just misreporting," Dana said, her voice low, measured. "It was coordinated. They had the fake narrative ready before the footage even aired. This wasn't spontaneous. This was strategic character assassination." Jasmine sat still, her fingers interlaced. She wasn't shocked, not anymore. But she was furious. Not with rage, but with something colder. Clarity. They had taken her voice, her integrity, her public image, and twisted it into a caricature. And for what? To discredit her before a key legislative vote? To punish her for not playing quiet? To remind every bold woman of color in office what the cost of visibility could be? She turned back to Elliot, who now pulled up the donor records Tucker had waved around during his segment. "See this?" he said, pointing to a file dated 6 months prior. "This is a blog post from a known disinformation outlet. No sourcing, no verification, but Carlson quoted it as fact." Dana nodded, already drafting the outlines of a defamation suit. "This isn't journalism," she said. "It's narrative warfare." Jasmine looked at the screen one last time, the version of herself that America had been told to fear. Her image distorted, her voice forged, her intent erased. But now she had something they hadn't counted on. Receipts, clarity, and a legal strategy that didn't just aim to clear her name, but to dismantle the machine that tried to erase it. And when the truth had been stripped bare, dissected, time-stamped, and made undeniable, Jasmine Crockett did what no one expected from the woman they had painted as reckless. She didn't lash out. She filed. Quietly, precisely, and with the full weight of the Constitution behind her, Jasmine and her legal team submitted a civil suit to the United States District Court for the District of Columbia. The defendants were clearly named Fox News Network LLC and Tucker Carlson, not just as a media figure, but as an individual actor who, according to the filing, knowingly and maliciously weaponized deception to irreparably harm the character, career, and safety of a sitting member of Congress. The complaint was 47 pages long, dense with legal citations, media transcripts, and forensic analysis. But its core was simple and searing. This wasn't journalism gone wrong. This was intentional harm packaged as entertainment. Jasmine wasn't asking for sympathy. She was demanding accountability. The lawsuit sought $55 million in damages, not as a publicity stunt, but as a reflection of measurable personal loss. It detailed how, following the broadcast, Jasmine received hundreds of threats, emails, phone calls, even hand-delivered letters. Her home address had been posted online. Staffers in her office reported being harassed. Capitol Police increased her security detail. But beyond the fear, the lawsuit painted a deeper injury: political erasure. The broadcast aired just days before internal House caucus elections. Jasmine had been a frontrunner for chair of the House Oversight Committee, a leadership role that would have made her the most influential freshman Democrat on that panel. After the smear campaign, her name was quietly withdrawn from consideration. "Too polarizing now," one unnamed colleague reportedly said. The damage wasn't just to her image, it was to her opportunity, to the momentum she had earned through years of work. It was the price of defamation paid in silence, in exclusion, in doors no longer opening. But the suit did not stop at career loss. It included clear evidence of physical endangerment, stating that Jasmine had been followed on 2 separate occasions by individuals quoting Carlson's monologue word for word. One man shouted, "Well, you're a media traitor," in a grocery store parking lot before being stopped by security. Another left a voice message that began with the words, "You don't deserve your seat, liar," and ended with a threat against her family. These weren't abstract consequences. They were immediate, real, and terrifying. In one of the most powerful sections of the filing, her attorney Dana Patel wrote, "When media figures intentionally alter facts and present manipulated narratives to millions, they do not merely inform, they incite. And when that incitement leads to fear, isolation, and legitimate threat, it is not protected speech. It is targeted harm." Jasmine wasn't just suing for herself. The language of the lawsuit made that clear. She was challenging a culture of unchecked power, one where networks could destroy lives with impunity and walk away under the shield of free speech. But free speech, her team argued, did not include falsifying audio with AI, presenting unverified data as fact, or knowingly misleading the public to provoke outrage. The legal demand was threefold: a full retraction of the broadcast, a public apology aired in the same time slot over 3 consecutive nights, and a financial penalty large enough to send a message not just to Fox, but to the entire media landscape. This was not a political gesture. It was a line in the sand. By mid-afternoon, word of the filing had reached every newsroom in the country. Some called it unprecedented, others called it overdue. But for Jasmine Crockett, it was neither. It was the next logical step when the truth had been twisted too far and the cost of silence had grown unbearable. She hadn't filed in anger. She had filed in clarity. And in doing so, she had turned the cameras back, not to reclaim her image, but to put truth on the record, this time without edits. But even as Jasmine's lawsuit sent ripples through the media and legal world, Fox News moved with calculated speed. They did what every empire under fire does. They lawyered up. Within 24 hours of the filing, the network released a carefully worded statement and confirmed it had retained the services of Redstone and Holt, one of the most expensive and aggressive legal firms in Washington. Their attorneys were seasoned veterans in crisis defense, known for defending tech billionaires, multinational oil conglomerates, and now a media powerhouse accused of character assassination. The firm wasted no time framing the lawsuit as a political stunt. "This is not about truth," their spokesperson declared outside the courthouse. This is about silencing a free press. Mr. Carlson exercised his First Amendment rights, as every journalist must be able to do. On the surface, it sounded noble, principled even, but behind the podium and the polished rhetoric was a defense built not on truth, but on plausible deniability. They weren't trying to explain what happened. They were trying to make people forget that anything had happened at all. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Jasmine Crockett had something they weren't prepared for. A recording, not a leak, not a rumor. A first-hand, time-stamped, high-quality audio file recorded by someone inside the Tucker Carlson production team. A senior producer who had worked on the show for years had grown quietly uneasy with the direction it had taken. He knew what they were doing to Jasmine wasn't journalism, it was sabotage. And so, 3 days before the segment aired, during a morning editorial meeting, he pressed record on his phone. The voices captured on that audio weren't vague or speculative. They were sharp, intentional, and unmistakable. One voice, calm, commanding, spoke with cold strategy. "She's rising too fast. If we don't cut her down now, she's going to be Kamala 2.0 before 2028. Another voice chimed in with laughter. "Cut the house footage. Cut the context. Just get the fire." No one objected. No one hesitated. In less than 12 minutes, the entire segment's motive was laid bare. Not as mistake, but design. The file reached Jasmine through a secure, encrypted channel 2 weeks before her legal team finalized the filing. There was no name attached, only a short message. "If you ever need to prove it, this is how." That night, Jasmine sat alone in her home. The blinds drawn, the lights low, listening to the voices of men deciding how to dismantle her. She didn't flinch. She didn't pace. She just listened. Once, then again, then a third time, until every word was burned into her memory. It wasn't shock that gripped her. It was recognition. This was the part no one talked about. The part where power didn't scream. It whispered. Where destruction didn't come through conflict, but through calculated edits, boardroom jokes, and production notes spoken like battle plans. And now, thanks to one quiet act of conscience, Jasmine had it all in her hands. She hadn't shown the recording to her legal team yet. She hadn't released it to the public. Because Jasmine Crockett understood timing. She knew that truth doesn't just have power, it has weight. And when it drops, it needs to land where it can't be ignored. The courtroom would come soon enough. But before that, she needed the world to hear not just what they had done to her, but how they had done it. And when that moment came, she wouldn't need to raise her voice. The voices on the tape would speak for themselves. And Jasmine knew the moment had come. After weeks of legal maneuvers, media spin, and silence weaponized as strategy, the courtroom doors opened not just to lawyers and jurors, but to a nation. The presiding judge had approved live broadcast coverage of the proceedings, citing overwhelming public interest in the precedent-setting implications of the case. Nearly every major network picked up the feed. Cable news anchors fell silent. Online platforms embedded countdowns. When the stream went live, over 80 million people tuned in across television and digital platforms. In living rooms, classrooms, break rooms, and airport terminals, Americans from every corner of the country watched as Jasmine Crockett stepped into federal court. Not as a defendant, not as a politician, but as a citizen demanding the truth be heard in full. The courtroom itself was tense, humming with the static of anticipation. Reporters filled every bench, pens frozen midair. No one knew exactly what was about to happen, but everyone could feel it. Something was about to shift. The prosecution wasted no time. After establishing the timeline and laying out Fox News' repeated history of editorial manipulation, Dana Patel rose calmly from her seat. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady but clear, "we respectfully request permission to play for the jury what the defense has avoided from the very beginning. The unedited footage." The judge nodded. Lights dimmed. A large screen lowered behind the witness box, and a hushed silence settled across the room. Dana stepped aside as the first frame flickered to life. Grainy CSPAN footage, untouched and uncut. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Dana continued, turning back toward them, "you're about to hear what America was never allowed to see." The original video of Jasmine Crockett's speech played without interruption. No dramatic music, no graphics, no narration, just her words, her tone, her logic. She did not call for censorship. She did not threaten the press. She argued point by point for a constitutional framework that would define the limits between protected speech and calculated defamation, regardless of ideology. Her voice was calm. Her delivery was precise. She never named Fox. She never named Carlson, Dana reminded the room as the video concluded. But look what they turned her into. Then came the second video. Dana nodded to the technician, who began playing the Fox News segment that had aired nationwide. The differences were immediate and staggering. The color grading was darker. Her face was shadowed, her features hardened. The edits sliced her sentences in half, stripping away context and reassembling fragments into a distorted narrative. Passion became fury. Caution became threat. As the edited clip ran beside the original, gasps echoed throughout the courtroom. Dana didn't speak. She didn't need to. The footage was doing all the talking. One reporter in the gallery dropped her pen and clutched the edge of the bench. A legal scholar in the second row shook his head. Near the back, a veteran White House correspondent, stone-faced throughout the morning, lowered his head and wiped his eyes. For one long, breathless moment, no one moved. No one blinked. The courtroom was no longer just a venue for testimony. It was a reckoning, a place where a nation was forced to confront the dangerous ease with which truth could be bent, repackaged, and weaponized right before its eyes. Elliot Granger, Jasmine's expert attorney on forensic media analysis, stepped forward with quiet conviction. The courtroom had just seen the manipulated video, the damage laid bare. But now it was time to understand how it was done. Elliot stood beside a screen glowing with digital graphs and timestamps, his voice calm, exact, and unshakably clear. What you saw wasn't a mistake, he told the jury. It wasn't an editing error. It was manipulation, engineered and deliberate. He pointed to a side-by-side waveform of Jasmine's original voice and the altered segment aired by Fox. Right here, he said, zooming in on a subtle shift in pitch. This is where her voice was digitally altered. An AI-generated overlay replaced her real tone, layering synthetic emotion to make her sound angrier, more hostile. He let the spectrogram freeze on the screen, the colors pulsing like a digital fingerprint. This wasn't sloppiness, he added, scanning the jury. This was surgical. Elliot turned next to a separate chart, lines of back-end metadata pulled from the network's distribution logs. We also traced how the segment was deployed, he continued. It was uploaded to select social media accounts and political forums before it ever aired on television. These accounts were ready, scripted, seeded to spread it the second it went live. This wasn't commentary, it was a coordinated operation. The defense rose, objecting on grounds of editorial privilege. Elliot paused but didn't flinch. The judge overruled the objection, then looked directly at the gallery. Freedom of speech, the judge said, does not extend to manufactured deception, especially when it's designed to cause real, measurable harm. For a moment, the room was completely still. Then quietly, hesitantly, someone in the back clapped once, then twice. A soft ripple of hushed applause broke through the courtroom. Not loud, but heavy with meaning. It was the first time anyone had clapped during the trial. It wouldn't be the last. Then came the turning point. Jasmine's legal team asked for one final piece of evidence, an audio file, the same one she had held back. With the judge's permission, the courtroom speakers played the internal recording captured in Tucker Carlson's production meeting. The voice, unmistakably male and confident, rang through the room. She's rising too fast. If we don't kill her image now, she's going to be Kamala 2.0. Another voice followed. Clip the speech. Cut the calm parts. Keep the fire. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. No one moved. No one whispered. Carlson himself, seated at the defense table, stared ahead, jaw clenched. This was no longer about narrative. This was evidence of motive, and intent in defamation law was everything. What followed was less of a trial and more of a reckoning. One by one, media analysts, ethics professors, and former producers were called to the stand. They all said the same thing. The broadcast crossed a line, not of politics, but of truth. By the time the prosecution rested, The nation watching from afar had already formed its own verdict. But inside the courtroom, the air held the weight of something deeper, a collective realization that the tools of information had been turned into weapons and that someone had finally drawn the line. Jasmine sat still as the footage faded and the lights returned. Her face was calm, her posture unshaken. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't demanded. She had simply let the truth speak. And in doing so, she had forced millions to see what they'd missed in the noise. A woman misrepresented, deconstructed, and nearly erased, now standing in full, undeniable clarity. The camera didn't need to pan. The jury didn't need to deliberate yet. For a brief, powerful moment, justice wasn't a verdict. It was a silence so deep, even the lies knew they had nowhere left to run. And outside the courtroom, the country began to fracture. The moment the unedited video played, the moment Elliot Granger revealed how Jasmine's voice had been digitally manipulated, the national conversation split into two irreconcilable halves. One side exploded in protest. "Fox is under attack," they cried. "This is a political takedown disguised as a lawsuit." Prominent conservative voices filled primetime airwaves, declaring that journalism itself was on trial. "This isn't about truth," one host shouted. "This is about control. They're trying to scare every reporter in America into silence." Political action committees began fundraising off the case, warning supporters that if Jasmine Crockett won, your favorite anchors could be next. Lawsuits, they claimed, were now weapons, and Jasmine wasn't a victim. She was the aggressor. The irony was thick. The very people who had distorted her voice were now accusing her of silencing theirs. But across the other side of the divide, a quieter, more serious current was rising. Millions had watched the trial live. They had seen the raw footage. They had heard the clipped version played next to it. They had seen Jasmine's tone twisted, her words rearranged, her face darkened. Not by bias, but by design. And they were stunned. This wasn't a matter of partisan spin anymore. It was something deeper, something more personal. Because if a sitting congresswoman could be digitally recut, revoiced, and redistributed to millions in a way that completely changed her message, what did that mean for everyone else? Editorial boards at Reuters and Associated Press, long committed to neutrality, broke their silence. In a joint editorial, they wrote, "This is not about suppressing free speech. This is about protecting the public from deliberate disinformation broadcast with impunity." For the first time in years, major media outlets found themselves re-examining the boundaries between protected speech and institutional deception. Inside the Capitol, the fallout turned legislative. 3 days after the courtroom broadcast, a coalition of Democratic senators unveiled the Media Accountability Act, a bill drafted with the speed and urgency of crisis response. The language was sharp, unmistakable in intent. It proposed the creation of an independent oversight board to investigate media outlets accused of deliberate manipulation. It introduced stiff civil penalties for networks found guilty of editing political speech in ways that intentionally distorted meaning. And most notably, it required that any broadcast found to have spread materially false narratives be corrected, publicly and in the same time slot, within 48 hours. The bill's lead sponsor, Senator Elena Doss of California, stood on the Capitol steps and faced a wall of microphones. Her voice didn't shake. "We are not censoring anyone. We are holding accountable those who knowingly trade lies for ratings. There is a difference between tough reporting and targeted fabrication. In this case, this woman has shown us that line has been crossed." Jasmine Crockett didn't take the podium that day. She stood among the crowd, her hands folded in front of her, listening as the bill her pain helped inspire was unveiled. She had never asked to be a symbol. She didn't want to be the face of legislative reform. But in that moment, she understood what had happened to her had pushed the country to a long overdue conversation. One not just about Fox News or Tucker Carlson, but about us, about whether we still believed in truth as something objective, or whether it had become just another weapon to be sharpened and sold. And as the cameras turned to catch reactions, as hashtags began trending and opinion columns dropped hourly, the stakes became terrifyingly clear. If this failed, if the courts ruled against her or the Senate turned its back, it wouldn't just be Jasmine Crockett who lost. It would be every person who ever stood in front of a camera and trusted that the truth, if spoken clearly enough, would be heard as intended. She had already learned that wasn't always the case. Now she was trying to make sure it never became the rule, and just when it seemed the courtroom had reached its emotional peak, the next witness shifted everything. The judge called forward a name unfamiliar to the public, but one that had sent shockwaves through the Fox News legal team. Rachel Linwood, a former senior segment producer who had worked under Tucker Carlson for nearly 6 years. As she took the stand, the tension in the room thickened. She wasn't a partisan. She wasn't seeking revenge. Her expression was composed, but her hands trembled slightly as she was sworn in. What she held wasn't speculation. It was documentation. Proof that the broadcast targeting Jasmine Crockett wasn't just reckless. It had been sanctioned from the top. The entire segment, Rachel began, was approved, framed, and prioritized directly by senior leadership, by Mr. Carlson himself and those above him. Murmurs spread across the room. There was no misunderstanding. There was a directive. Then she produced the email. It had been preserved, copied, and sent to her personal archive the day she resigned. Addressed to Carlson's editorial team, time-stamped just 2 weeks before the broadcast, the subject line was stark. Urgent, pre-election strategy. Rachel cleared her throat and read aloud, her voice steady now. She's a growing threat to national optics. If we don't discredit her now, we're handing her a megaphone before November. Strip the speech. Clip what scares our base. She wants to look like a reformer. Make her look like a radical. The signature was unmistakable. The courtroom froze. Carlson sat motionless, his jaw clenched, staring straight ahead. This wasn't a misfire. This was a mission. Planned, approved, executed. Not in the chaos of breaking news, but in the cold calculation of political timing. Rachel went on. She described how production meetings were no longer editorial discussions, but strategy sessions where ideological targets were chosen like talking points. We weren't asked to inform, she said. We were asked to win, to take control of the narrative, even if it meant editing truth until it no longer resembled itself. Her voice didn't crack, but her eyes did. She looked at Jasmine, just for a moment. I left because I couldn't watch us destroy someone who hadn't done anything wrong, someone who was simply inconvenient. The jury looked stunned. Several members of the press scribbled furiously. A CNN analyst whispered, "This trial just became something much bigger." For Jasmine Crockett, sitting quietly at the plaintiff's table, it wasn't vindication. Not yet. But it was something close. Because now the world could see it, in writing, in record, in testimony under oath, that what had happened to her wasn't just a smear. It was a hit job, ordered from the top and executed like a campaign. And if justice meant anything, it had to start with the truth, spoken by those who once helped hide it. And as the courtroom sat suspended in the weight of Rachel Linwood's revelation, Jasmine's legal team turned once more to the screen. This time, it wasn't forensic data. It wasn't internal emails or edited clips. It was something far more powerful, a moment of truth that no one had seen until now. Dana Patel stepped forward, a remote in her hand. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "with the court's permission, we would like to enter one final piece of evidence. A full, unedited video from a congressional oversight hearing, recorded 3 months before the broadcast in question, but never aired publicly." The judge gave a silent nod. Lights dimmed again. The screen flickered on. And for the first time, America saw the Jasmine Crockett they were never meant to see. The footage began with Jasmine sitting at a long wooden bench beneath the seal of the United States Congress, flanked by men who spoke twice as loud, but said half as much. She waited. Then she leaned forward and spoke, not with anger, but with authority so precise, so clear, it silenced the entire chamber. "I'm not here to perform," she said. "I'm here to protect. And if telling the truth makes some people uncomfortable, then maybe discomfort is what justice requires." She didn't raise her voice once. Instead, she laid out a case for ethical standards in government, in law enforcement, and, unapologetically, in the media. You don't get to call it journalism if you edit people into monsters. You don't get to hide behind freedom of speech when your words are weapons. And you certainly don't get to call me dangerous when the only thing I've ever endangered is a lie. The camera stayed on her as she spoke. No cuts, no music, no framing tricks. Just a woman, standing in truth, surrounded by power, and refusing to bow to it. She ended with a line that didn't just echo, it landed. I didn't come here to be believed. I came here to speak anyway. And in that moment, something cracked open in the courtroom. The jurors, silent for hours, analytical, unreadable, stood. One after another, they rose from their seats, not out of obligation, not for show, but because they had just witnessed something rare. A human being unfiltered, unapologetic, and unbreakable. The gallery followed. Reporters stood. Some wept. Others simply clapped with trembling hands. It wasn't a performance. It was the truth, restored in full color, full voice, full presence. And for the first time since the trial began, Jasmine turned to the crowd, not to plead or defend, but to meet their eyes. She had been distorted, diminished, and dismissed. But in that one unreleased clip, the lie unraveled. Not because someone explained it, but because everyone felt it. In a courtroom built to measure facts, they had finally witnessed the soul of the matter, and no edit could undo it. And after the final testimony had been heard, after the footage had been played, and the truth laid bare for all to see, there was only one thing left for the courtroom and the nation to do: wait. The air inside the chamber had changed. The once skeptical faces in the jury box now carried something different. Not pity, not outrage, but clarity. Jasmine Crockett had not only survived one of the most brutal smear campaigns in recent political history, she had exposed it piece by piece until even her enemies could no longer look away. Still, no one moved. No one dared to speak. The judges' chambers remained closed for nearly 2 hours. Every camera outside the courthouse stayed live. The nation, still watching in real time, was holding its breath. Then at exactly 4:06 p.m., the door swung open. Judge Langston returned to the bench with a single folder in hand. He sat slowly, carefully. Even he seemed changed, less like an administrator of law and more like a man who understood the gravity of the moment he was about to deliver. The courtroom rose in silence. Jasmine stood too, her eyes locked on him, her back impossibly straight. After weeks of brutal cross-examinations, national humiliation, and relentless distortion, she stood not like a victim, but like someone who knew justice, if it existed at all, was about to speak. The judge looked down once at the folder, then raised his eyes. In the matter of Crockett versus Fox News Network and Carlson, he began, his voice carrying through the courtroom like a gavel unto itself. This court has reviewed all submitted evidence, including internal communications, unreleased congressional footage, third-party forensic analysis, and the sworn testimony of multiple witnesses. He paused. The question before this court has never been whether opinion is protected. It always will be. The question here is whether deliberate, coordinated falsification of a person's image, voice, and public record, broadcast to millions, falls within that same protection. Then came the words that would change everything. This court finds that Tucker Carlson and Fox News Network LLC are both legally and financially liable for defamation with actual malice. The words hit the room like an explosion, quiet but seismic. There was no celebration, no audible gas, just a shared collective intake of breath, as if no one wanted to exhale too early and miss what came next. The evidence submitted, the judge continued, demonstrates a clear, intentional effort to manipulate and reframe the plaintiff's statements using advanced editing tools, misleading visual effects, AI-generated audio overlays, and premeditated narrative packaging. These efforts were not editorial decisions. They were acts of sabotage, executed by media professionals who understood their power and abused it. He turned the page. For the damages sustained by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, including threats to her physical safety, measurable loss of political opportunity, and severe harm to her professional reputation, this court awards a total of $65 million in damages. This amount reflects the scale of the broadcast, the influence of the defendants, and the lasting harm caused by their deception. A ripple of stunned silence ran through the courtroom. Even Dana Patel blinked twice. Elliot Granger lowered his head. Jasmine didn't move. But the judge wasn't finished. In addition, he said, adjusting his tone, Fox News is hereby ordered to broadcast a full and unedited public apology written in collaboration with the plaintiff's legal team during its 8 p.m. primetime programming for 3 consecutive nights. These broadcasts shall include the following elements: acknowledgement of the altered footage, admission of editorial responsibility, and a full retraction of the original segment aired. Gasps this time. Audible. The press gallery erupted in scribbling. For a media empire that had never once publicly retracted a high-profile broadcast, this was not just a penalty, it was a public stripping of armor. And then, almost quietly, came the most damning sentence of all. Finally, the judge said, his voice dropping lower, this court will submit a formal recommendation to the United States Congress to open a broader federal investigation into the misuse of broadcast platforms, AI-enhanced misinformation, and politically motivated editorial practices. What this case has revealed goes beyond the plaintiff. It points to a systemic vulnerability in our democracy, one that cannot go unaddressed. He looked up. The gavel didn't fall yet. He let the silence hang. No one applauded. No one dared. What they had just heard was too large for clapping. Tucker Carlson remained stone-faced. Behind him, legal counsel whispered in urgent tones. But the damage was done. There was no spin strong enough to undo a federal ruling, no monologue clever enough to outpace the footage America had seen, unedited for the very first time. Across the courtroom, Jasmine closed her eyes for one brief second, not out of relief but to steady herself. The war had ended, but the cost of the battle had been exacted from her name, her face, her voice. She had been accused, attacked, manipulated, and nearly erased. And yet she had stood still, long enough for the truth to rise, long enough for the machine that tried to break her to break itself. And now that truth wasn't a headline. It was law. It was precedent. It was permanent. As the judge finally raised his gavel and brought it down with a single, final strike, the echo didn't just ring through the courtroom. It echoed across the country, through every newsroom, through every camera, through every anchor who ever wondered if accountability would ever reach their side of the screen. That day it did, and as the gavel's echo faded and the court clerk called the final adjournment, the walls that had contained Jasmine Crockett's fight could no longer contain its impact. What had started in silence, in slander, in the manipulated image of a woman meant to be broken, had now erupted into the streets. The courthouse steps were flooded with people, not protesters or partisans, but citizens, students, journalists, mothers holding their children, retired veterans with flags folded under their arms. They had come not just to witness history, but to reclaim something lost. And as the heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open and Jasmine emerged, flanked by her legal team but walking alone, a wave of silence swept through the crowd. Cameras clicked, but no one spoke. Not yet. She paused at the podium, eyes scanning the sea of strangers who had chosen to believe in her before the verdict. And then slowly, she leaned into the microphone. "I know what they wanted," she said, her voice low but carrying across the plaza. "They wanted me to break, to react, to scream, to fit the version of me they created, because that version was easier to hate than the truth." Her words hit not like a speech, but like a confession, raw and unguarded. "But I didn't break. I didn't react. I refused to perform for a camera that had already made up its mind." She stopped and looked directly at the rows of journalists near the front. And today, for the first time, the truth got the final word, not in a headline, not in a soundbite, but in the rule of law. Behind her, Dana Patel nodded quietly. Elliot Granger folded his arms. The crowd stood frozen, their silence deeper than any cheer could have been. "This isn't a personal victory," Jasmine continued. "This is not about me." Her voice rose, not in volume, but in clarity, like a note struck clean on glass. "This is a victory for every voice that has ever been twisted, every truth that has been edited until it could be weaponized. This is a line in the sand for media, for democracy, for every person watching who wondered if speaking up was still worth it." She held up the folded copy of the judge's ruling, trembling slightly in her hand. "I didn't fight to punish a network. I fought to prove that truth still matters, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's expensive, even when it's dangerous. A ripple of applause began, not loud, not thunderous, but building like a wave. Jasmine stepped back for a moment, breathing through it, steady. Then she leaned forward once more, voice unwavering now. They had power, I had truth, and for a long time, that didn't feel like it was enough. But it was. It always is. The crowd was no longer silent. They were standing, some clapping, others holding phones in the air, many wiping their eyes, but no one left. No one turned away, because they knew they were not just watching a woman speak. They were watching a system for once bend toward justice. I didn't win this case, Jasmine finished. The truth did. The version of me they tried to destroy, that version never existed. And now the whole world knows it. She looked into the cameras not with anger, but with endurance, earned and unshakable. We have a long way to go, but today we take that step knowing that truth is not just something we hope for. It's something we fight for. And when we do, it wins. And with that, she stepped away from the mic, not rushed, not escorted, but followed. Followed by thousands who had come to see justice. Followed by millions more who had felt invisible, misrepresented, or unheard. She had walked into court alone. She was leaving with something far greater, a nation's memory, rewritten, not by power, not by media, but by a woman who refused to be erased. And as Jasmine stepped down from the podium, her words still echoing across a nation that had just witnessed the line between truth and fiction, redrawn in real time, the battle shifted from the courtroom to the Capitol. Justice had been delivered to one woman, but the wounds exposed were national, systemic, and festering. The media had become a battlefield where facts were optional and reputations disposable. And the ruling against Fox News and Tucker Carlson had revealed just how deeply that rot had spread. Jasmine's victory, though personal in form, had cracked open a door long sealed shut. And through that door came a storm, the Fair Broadcasting Act, a piece of legislation that had once been too bold, too controversial, too politically risky, now suddenly carried the moral momentum of a country desperate for reform. Within 48 hours of the court's final verdict, Senate hearing rooms were packed wall to wall, not with lobbyists, not with networks, but with citizens, legal scholars, ethics professors, whistleblowers from inside newsrooms, and survivors of media defamation campaigns testified under oath, detailing how misinformation had not only distorted elections, but lives. The Fair Broadcasting Act was no longer a fringe idea. It was now a national demand. The bill proposed sweeping changes, the creation of an independent media standards commission with investigatory power, mandatory transparency in editing and AI use in broadcast, and legally binding corrections aired in the same format and time slot as the original misinformation. For the first time in modern history, the legislative branch wasn't just debating freedom of speech, it was confronting the consequences of freedom abused. C-SPAN broadcast every minute of the debate. Jasmine Crockett's name was invoked repeatedly, not in partisan tones, but with reverence. Her case became the anchor around which every argument orbited. One senator held up a screenshot from her manipulated clip and said, "This isn't journalism. This is information warfare, and we've been asleep at the wheel." Another, more conservative voice challenged the bill, but even then didn't defend Fox. "I'm not here to protect liars," he said, "but we need to be sure we're not punishing dissent in the process." That tension made headlines, but so did something else. Polls showed nearly 70% of Americans, across political lines, supported the bill's core provisions. Trust had been broken for too long, and now a nation that once consumed outrage like oxygen was finally asking, what if truth could be protected again? Behind closed doors, media executives panicked. Lobbyists flooded Senate offices. Networks issued preemptive apologies for past content and quietly updated editorial policies. A memo leaked from inside one major outlet read, "We are no longer in control of the narrative. Adjust accordingly." But the public wasn't waiting for permission. On university campuses, students launched independent initiatives to audit news coverage using open-source AI. Civil society organizations began building grassroots campaigns demanding editorial transparency from local broadcasters. For the first time, misinformation wasn't just a political buzzword, it was a legal risk. The balance of power was shifting, and it was Jasmine Crockett, once nearly erased, who had lit the fuse. And in committee after committee, the fight to pass the Fair Broadcasting Act became a battle between those who saw media reform as censorship and those who saw it as survival. Jasmine never took the floor to speak on the bill. She didn't need to. Her case had already spoken loud enough, but she was there, in the gallery, sitting silently as senators argued and amended and conceded. Her presence was a reminder. This wasn't abstract. This wasn't theoretical. This was a country wrestling with the question of whether truth should remain negotiable. By the time the bill reached the national stage for open debate, it had already shifted the culture. Anchor desks were less smug. Editorial teams were suddenly transparent. And millions of Americans, once passive viewers, had become skeptical, engaged, demanding. Jasmine's story had become a litmus test for the future of American media. Would the next truth teller have to survive what she did, or would they be protected before the damage was done? And with each reading of the Fair Broadcasting Act, with every clause invoking words like accountability, disclosure, and digital integrity, the message was clear. The age of invisible edits and unchecked spin was no longer inevitable. The rules were changing, and this time, the truth had advocates, with microphones of their own. And as the Fair Broadcasting Act surged into national debate, reshaping the way a country thought about truth and power, Jasmine Crockett disappeared from the headlines, but not from history. The courtroom was behind her. The legislation was no longer hers to carry, but her name lived on in every hearing, every editorial, every public demand that media be not only free, but honest. And while others pushed the reform forward, Jasmine turned her attention to something more quiet and far more dangerous. What came next? Because if they could do it to her, they could do it to anyone. And if the system could be manipulated once, it could be manipulated again. So she watched, she waited. And when Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism called, inviting her to their centennial ceremony to receive the James Baldwin Integrity and Media Award, she accepted, not for prestige, but for purpose. The evening was cold, Manhattan's sky streaked with blue and gold lights from the upper floors of Low Memorial Library. Inside, the hall was packed. Journalists, students, professors, foreign correspondents, press freedom activists, even former critics who now sat in stunned admiration. The dean took the stage first. His speech was short, emotional, and raw. "Tonight we do not honor a journalist," he said, "but someone who held journalism to its highest purpose, truth without distortion, integrity without theater." As Jasmine stepped onto the stage, the room rose, not in performative applause, but in collective gratitude. She wore no dramatic expression, no triumphant smile. Her presence was quiet, steady. She stood at the lectern, looked out over a room filled with those who write the stories that shape nations, and spoke like someone who had once been written out of her own. "There was a time," she began, "when I believed that if I just spoke clearly enough, the world would hear me as I am. But I learned the hard way that truth isn't what you say, it's what they choose to edit. And if you don't fight for your voice, someone else will sell the version that suits them best." She paused, scanning the faces before her. "This is not an award for surviving. This is a call to action for those who create the narratives the rest of the world consumes. You are not just writers or anchors or producers. You are the front line between reality and fiction. And if you fail, democracy doesn't die in darkness. It dies under the glare of lights pointing the wrong way." Applause swelled, but she didn't linger. Instead, Jasmine stepped back, picked up the single item resting on the podium, a slim red folder stamped in black block text. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned in. She turned the folder outward, revealing the title to the entire auditorium. Case number 2026. Committee on Media Manipulation and Political Targeting. A silence fell over the room. Not confusion, but anticipation. Jasmine held the folder like a torch. Not a symbol of closure, but of continuation. The committee didn't yet exist. The case hadn't been assigned. But the battle ahead was already in motion, because the ruling hadn't been the end. It had only been proof of concept, that the system could be held accountable. Now came the real war, dismantling the pipelines of political propaganda, investigating algorithmic bias in content delivery, unmasking the deals between power and platform that turned journalism into a weapon. She gave no further details. She didn't need to. The folder said enough. The fight wasn't over, and she was already walking toward the next battlefield. As she stepped off the stage, students rushed forward, some to shake her hand, others simply to look her in the eye. One held up their phone, not for a photo, but to show her a note they'd typed, "I'm going to law school because of you." Jasmine nodded once, then moved on. Outside, the cold wind whipped across the steps of Columbia's library, but Jasmine barely felt it. She had walked out of worse storms, and in her hand, the folder didn't tremble. The war for truth had begun again, and this time, she wasn't alone. And as Jasmine walked away from the podium, from the trial, from the chaos, the nation didn't simply remember the facts of her case, they remembered the feeling it left behind. The tension, the fury, the silence. The moment a courtroom stopped being a stage and became a mirror for every manipulated truth we'd ever accepted without question. Her victory wasn't just legal, it was emotional, moral, undeniably human. Because behind every file folder, every shredded lie, every piece of synthetic audio or spliced video, there was a real person. And what was done to Jasmine Crockett could have been done to any of us. That was the lesson that didn't need to be stated. It was felt, in the gut, and it stayed. We talk often about justice as a system, but Jasmine revealed that it is first and foremost a resistance, a refusal to disappear. She stood her ground not because she had guarantees, but because she had convictions. She had no army, no media empire, no billionaire funders. What she had was the oldest tool of the powerless, the truth. But in a world where truth is sliced and dressed in costume, that tool alone is often not enough. And yet, she wielded it anyway. Not like a sword, but like a key that unlocked a door too many believed would never open. The one that separates fiction from fact, propaganda from principle, power from decency. The truth is, Jasmine shouldn't have survived this. Statistically, historically, structurally, everything was aligned to break her. She was a black woman speaking clearly in a country trained to hear her as angry. She was a reformer in a chamber that rewards silence. She was a target on a network that knew how to edit any nuance into a soundbite designed to enrage. And yet she stayed still. She endured the smear campaign not because she was unafraid, but because she knew the fear was never the point. The point was to endure long enough for the truth to come out the other side intact. And that is where her real strength lay. Not in the courtroom, but in the long nights with no cameras, no certainty, just the cold knowledge that she had been defamed and may never get her name back. But she did. Not because the system made it easy, but because she forced the system to look at itself. And in doing so, Jasmine exposed something many hoped would stay buried. That the most dangerous threat to democracy isn't misinformation. It's when misinformation is monetized, when facts become optional, when outrage is scripted, when truth is sliced to fit between commercials and then sold to the masses as gospel. That's not journalism. That's psychological warfare disguised as entertainment. Jasmine stood at the center of that storm and held up a mirror to it, and America finally looked. What she taught us, what she forced us to confront, is that truth is no longer self-evident. It must be protected. It must be proven. It must be defended, not only in courts of law, but in courts of public opinion, social media, newsrooms, and living rooms. Because the lie doesn't knock on the door anymore. It comes through the TV, through your phone, through a push notification designed to provoke, not inform. And if you don't stop it, if you don't question it, it becomes reality by default. But here's what Jasmine also reminded us. Truth is still powerful, not invincible, not invulnerable, but powerful enough to endure, if carried long enough, if held firm enough, if spoken clearly enough, even once. Because in a system addicted to spin, Truth is the only thing with weight, and when that weight is finally dropped, when the lie is cornered by clarity, even the most carefully constructed illusion begins to collapse. The deeper lesson isn't just about policy, it's about human cost, about what it takes, personally, spiritually, to hold your ground when the world decides what version of you it wants to believe. Jasmine had to watch her voice become weaponized. She had to see her image darkened, her tone hardened, her intentions flipped into threats. She had to sit in silence as millions consumed a character of her making that she had never met. And she fought back not by shouting over it, but by forcing it into the light, by refusing to vanish. And that's what makes her story more than remarkable. It makes it necessary. Because the truth is, someone else will sit in that courtroom next. A teacher, a whistleblower, a scientist, a parent. And when they do, they'll walk in knowing someone else survived it first. Someone stood their ground and reminded the world that justice isn't about who yells the loudest. It's about who refuses to lie, even when the lie would be easier. So if there is one final, unshakable truth from Jasmine Crockett's journey, it is this. Power can distort your face. It can edit your voice. It can erase your name from headlines. But it cannot erase the truth. Not forever. Not if you fight for it. And in a country still deciding whether truth is a value or a liability, Jasmine Crockett reminded us, the fight is not over, but the line has been drawn. And it was drawn by a woman who refused to be rewritten. And as the echoes of Jasmine's victory rippled across the nation, across courtrooms, campuses, newsrooms, and living rooms, one truth remained. This wasn't the end. It was the opening chapter of a longer, harder fight. Because while Jasmine had exposed the machine still ran. Just quieter now, just smarter. The manipulation hadn't stopped. The distortion hadn't disappeared. It had simply learned to hide in smaller edits, subtler biases, friendlier voices. And so the question now wasn't, can the truth survive? Jasmine had answered that. The question now was, who will carry it next? Because the truth, no matter how powerful, is not self-sustaining. It needs guardians, fighters, witnesses, and it needs them now more than ever. So this is the call, not to cheer, not to repost, but to act, to hold your media accountable, not just when they lie, but when they blur, to read past the headlines, to demand transparency from the platforms you trust, to ask who edited this, who benefits from it, to stop mistaking algorithms for objectivity and outrage for truth. The fight Jasmine began doesn't need more heroes. It needs honest people, consistently brave, in the small, invisible moments where lies are planted and truth is too inconvenient to print. It means writing letters, showing up to hearings, voting for reform, sharing the story not just of Jasmine's win, but of the darkness she had to wade through to get there. Because if the next Jasmine is watching, somewhere out there, already being misrepresented, already being silenced, what will she see? Will she see a nation that learned, or one that clapped and moved on? Truth is not a headline, it's a responsibility, and now it's yours. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.